The wind carried dust across the desolate prairie, coating the world in a dull brown haze. She sat on the old wooden porch of the cabin, clutching the youngest of her 3 daughters close to her chest. Her arms bore bruises that no woman should carry, and her eyes had that empty glassy look of someone who had cried too long, too often. Behind her, 2 little girls peeked from the doorway, their faces streaked with dirt but their eyes brighter than she could afford to be. They were children who still believed the world might have something good to offer. Her husband was gone now, taken by his own temper and the whiskey bottle that had finally betrayed him. He had died as he had lived, angry at everything and everyone, but mostly at her for giving him daughters instead of sons. For years she endured the fists, the cruel words, the nights where she prayed he might not stumble home at all. Now that prayer had been answered, though not by her hand, and she was left alone with 3 little girls, no money, and no protection in a land where women without men were often forgotten or used up. It was on such a day of despair that he rode into her life. The widowed cowboy, weathered by the sun and carrying loss of his own, guided his horse toward the cabin. His shadow fell across her porch, and the children shrank back, unused to any man's presence except the one who hurt them. He tipped his hat, his voice calm but steady. "Ma'am, I heard tell you were alone now." She did not answer, only tightened her hold on her baby, her body stiff with the reflex of fear. He did not press, just let his eyes rest on the little ones. Something softened in his face, though the lines carved by grief remained. "You've got fine daughters," he said, as if daring her late husband's ghost to argue. Her throat caught. The words seemed impossible, fine daughters. She had never once heard them spoken with pride. She wanted to believe he meant it, but the years of beatings had taught her not to trust praise, not to trust men. "They ain't wanted," she whispered, her voice breaking. He dismounted slowly, not rushing, making every move steady, like a man who understood the way wild creatures spook if you come too fast. He knelt to the level of the girls peeking out from the door. "What's your names?" he asked gently. The oldest stepped forward with hesitation, chin trembling but brave enough to answer. Her name rolled off her lips, quiet but clear. The cowboy smiled at her as though it were the most important name he had ever heard. He nodded to the second girl, who whispered hers in return, her small fingers gripping the edge of the doorway. Then the baby gurgled, tugging at her mother's dress, and the cowboy's smile widened, his eyes lighting with something tender. "3 daughters," he said softly, looking back at their mother. "That's a blessing, not a curse." Her tears burned her eyes before she even knew they were falling. No one had ever spoken of her children that way. No one had ever said they were anything but a burden, a shame. The days that followed were quiet at first. He began fixing the fence line that had fallen apart, bringing wood for the fire, leaving fresh meat at her door. He never asked for anything in return. He never spoke ill of her husband, though the bruises on her body told him enough. Slowly, the children grew bold enough to meet him at the fence, then follow him to the barn, curious about his horse, laughing as he let them touch its mane. Their laughter, sharp and sweet, stirred life back into the cabin that had only known silence and fear. One evening, as the sun bled orange into the horizon, she stepped out onto the porch to find him sitting on the ground with the girls around him. He was showing them how to whittle, his hands steady as he guided theirs. Each little piece of wood became something, an animal, a doll, a toy horse. The girls' eyes glowed with pride, clutching their creations like treasures. She stood there watching, her hand pressed to her mouth, her heart twisting with something she had not felt in years, hope. When he looked up and saw her, his gaze held hers without hesitation. "They need someone to teach them they're worth more than the world will ever tell them," he said. His voice carried the quiet weight of truth. "If you'll let me, I'll raise them proud." Her knees weakened, not from fear but from the breaking of chains she hadn't even realized still bound her. She wanted to believe him, but the ghosts of her past whispered that men promise much and deliver pain. Yet the evidence was before her, her daughters laughing, smiling, holding wooden toys in hands that had known too much trembling. She walked down the steps, the baby on her hip, and for the first time in years, she did not feel smaller than the earth beneath her feet. She stood before the widowed cowboy, close enough to see the loss in his own eyes, the pain of a man who had buried love and yet had not let his heart turn bitter. "They've never had a father who wanted them," she said, her voice trembling but strong. He held her gaze. "Then let me be the one who does." The prairie wind howled across the land, but within that small circle, mother, daughters, and widowed cowboy, there was something stronger than the years of cruelty. It was the birth of a new promise, fragile yet fierce, like the first green sprout pushing through cracked earth. And for the first time, she believed her daughters might grow up not with shame, but with pride. The morning light crept over the prairie, spilling gold across the horizon as though heaven itself had set fire to the earth. She rose before her daughters, as she always did, to begin the day with the same routine: fetch water, stoke the fire, mend what needed mending. But things were not as they had once been. The cabin felt less like a prison, less like a place of bruises and silences. There was laughter in the corners now, and wood shavings scattered across the floor where her girls had played with the toys the widowed cowboy had carved. He had not promised wealth or miracles. He only gave time, presence, and a steadiness that held even when the wind of hardship blew. Each day, he found reason to return. Sometimes it was a broken fence board, sometimes a sack of flour, sometimes nothing more than the excuse to check on the girls. And each time, her heart tested itself, wondering if trust could really be given, wondering if this man could truly be different. One afternoon, she stood by the window, sewing patches into her eldest daughter's dress. The fabric was worn thin, threadbare from too many washes, but the little girl twirled when she tried it on, smiling as though she wore silk. The cowboy watched from the porch, his hat in his hands. He looked at the girl as though she was the finest lady in town, and her mother caught her breath. How easily he saw worth where others had seen nothing. In town, whispers had started. A widowed cowboy spending so much time at the cabin of a woman left alone with children. Some tongues wagged cruelly, questioning his motives. Others smirked, saying she was fortunate to have caught the attention of a man at all. She heard the murmurs when she went for supplies, heard the snide tones of women who had once turned away from her in pity. The sheriff even stopped by once, leaning heavy against his saddle, hinting that she should be careful. But when the cowboy heard the talk, he did not flinch. He stood taller, his hand resting on the shoulder of her eldest when they passed through town. "Let them talk," he told her quietly. "The truth ain't in their mouths. It's in what these girls grow up to be." Her youngest began to walk that spring, tottering unsteady steps across the porch. The cowboy crouched low, his arms open wide, his voice coaxing her gently. The child stumbled into his embrace, giggling, and clung to his shirt. He lifted her high into the air, and for a moment, her laughter filled every empty hollow his life had carried. He looked at her as though she were his own blood. But there were trials that could not be ignored. The land was harsh, the cattle thin from a dry season. Coyotes circled too close at night, and once, a rattlesnake coiled near the well where the middle daughter had gone for water. She froze in terror, her small body rigid. He came running, gun in hand, and with one sharp shot, the snake lay still. He scooped the girl into his arms and carried her back to the cabin, pressing her trembling body close. "You're safe now, little one," he whispered, brushing her hair back from her tear-streaked face. That night, the girl sat by the fire, clutching the wooden horse he had carved for her. She would not sleep alone, so he sat awake in the rocking chair until her eyes finally closed. The mother watched from the shadows of the room, her heart aching with a strange mixture of gratitude and fear. Gratitude that her daughters had finally known a man's protection without pain. Fear that the world might snatch it away, as it always seemed to. The eldest daughter began to change, too. She straightened her back when she walked, her chin lifting with a pride she had never dared show before. He taught her how to ride, placing her small hands on the reins, guiding her through the rhythm of the horse. She fell once, skinning her knee, but he knelt beside her and told her, "Every fall just makes you tougher. You ain't weak, not by a long shot." She climbed back up, jaw set, and rode again. Her mother saw the fire in her eyes, the fire of a girl learning she could be more than what the world demanded. There were nights when the cowboy sat outside beneath the stars, alone with his thoughts. She joined him once, hesitant, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He took one, their hands brushing for the briefest moment. They sat in silence, the children asleep inside, the night vast and endless. After a long while, he spoke, his voice low. "I lost a son once," he said. "And his mama, too. Took a sickness I couldn't fight." His words hung heavy, full of the grief of a man who had buried his heart with those he loved. She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw the depth of the pain he carried. He wasn't trying to replace what he lost. He wasn't trying to claim her daughters for the sake of filling a void. He wanted to give because giving was the only way he knew to honor what had been taken. Her hand trembled as it reached across the small space between them, resting lightly on his. He didn't flinch. He only looked at her with those weathered eyes, and in the silence, something unspoken passed between them, a promise not made in words but in presence. The summer brought storms. One violent night, thunder split the sky, and rain pounded against the roof so hard it threatened to cave. Lightning flashed, revealing fear on the girls' faces. The youngest cried, the middle clung to her mother, and the eldest tried to be brave but shook all the same. The cowboy wrapped them all in blankets, his arms strong around them. Storms always pass, he told them firmly. They roar and rage, but they don't last forever. And neither does the fear. The next morning, when the world lay broken by the storm, fences down, shingles torn, cattle scattered, he didn't complain. He rose at dawn and began the work, the girls helping as best they could, their small hands carrying nails, their laughter surprising even themselves. She joined him, her sleeves rolled, her strength showing through in ways she hadn't remembered she still had. Together, they rebuilt, board by board, until the cabin stood tall again. Through every hardship, every whisper of gossip, every reminder of the cruel past, he stood firm. And slowly, so did she. The girls bloomed in that steadiness, their pride no longer beaten down, their laughter no longer silenced. They learned to ride, to fish, to mend, to pray, to dream. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, she would watch them sleeping, 3 daughters who had been born into a world that scorned them, now lying safe beneath a roof held together by more than wood and nails. It was held by a man's quiet strength, by a woman's rediscovered courage, and by the fierce promise that these girls would never again be told they were less than enough. And as the prairie stretched endless around them, the widowed cowboy kept his vow, not with grand speeches, but with every action, every sacrifice, every moment of patience. He raised them proud, just as he had promised. The prairie did not forgive weakness, but it also did not lie. Every season tested a man and a woman to their core, and only those willing to fight quietly and tirelessly ever carved out a life worth keeping. For her and her daughters, each day was survival, but with the widowed cowboy at their side, survival began to feel like living. The town, however, never let them forget their place. Women whispered when she came to buy flour, men raised eyebrows when they saw the cowboy ride with 3 girls hanging off him like he was their father. More than once, the storekeeper looked her up and down with a smirk that said she ought to be grateful for any man's attention. She kept her chin low, her voice polite, but inside, shame battled with pride. The girls noticed the stares, too. The eldest, who had grown bold from riding lessons and evenings by the fire learning to read from the cowboy's weathered Bible, once tugged her mother's sleeve and asked, "Why did they look at us like that?" Her mother's throat tightened, but before she could answer, the cowboy spoke. "Because they don't understand what strength looks like," he said. "And they never will if all they do is stare." The girl nodded, her chest puffing with a small sense of defiance that only grew stronger with time. By autumn, the eldest could ride as well as any ranch hand. She sat tall on the horse he had gifted her, a young chestnut mare spirited enough to match her determination. The middle daughter, quieter and softer, preferred to stay near the cabin, learning to sew and cook, though she had a sharp eye with a rifle. The youngest toddled everywhere, laughing with a freedom her sisters had never known at her age. Each child found her own strength under his watchful eye, and her mother began to see in them what she had never been allowed to see before, futures. The cowboy worked the land as though it were his blood's duty, mending fences, branding cattle, riding out into storms when one strayed. But he never shut the girls out of the work. He showed them how to knot rope, how to build a fire, how to mend leather. "A girl should never be told she can't," he would say, handing them tools that had once been forbidden to their hands. They believed him, because he never faltered when he said it. Winter came hard that year, with snow that piled against the cabin walls and winds that howled like wolves. Food ran low, and the baby grew sick with a cough that rattled her chest. Fear threatened to strangle her mother, but the cowboy rode through snowdrifts to fetch herbs and blankets from town, returning frostbitten but alive. He held the baby through the worst nights, rocking her in arms that had once held his own lost child. His whispered prayers filled the cabin, steady and raw. "Lord, don't take another from me. Let her stay." Let her grow. The baby lived, and spring broke with birdsong. But the sickness left her small and frail, and the mother worried constantly that the world might yet steal her youngest. The cowboy only reminded her, every life's a fight. But she's got the heart of one who'll never quit. And slowly, the little girl grew stronger, her laughter returning to echo across the fields. As the years turned, the bond between them all deepened. The girls no longer flinched when a man's shadow crossed the doorway. Instead, they ran to the cowboy, clinging to his legs, showing him the treasures of their day. He treated each one as though her stories were as grand as the legends of kings. And their mother, though cautious, began to let her heart lean toward the steadiness he offered. There were nights when she dreamed of her past, of fists slamming against her, of voices telling her she had failed for giving birth to daughters. She woke sweating, gasping, trembling. On one such night, the cowboy found her sitting outside in the cold, staring at the stars with tears frozen on her cheeks. He sat beside her without speaking, just letting his silence shield her. After a long while, she whispered, "I don't know how to believe I deserve peace." His voice was quiet but sure. "It ain't about deserving. It's about living long enough to claim it." She turned her face toward him, and though no words passed between them after that, something shifted. The space between them was no longer filled only with gratitude or duty. It was filled with something deeper, trust growing into love, slow and steady as spring rain seeping into the earth. But peace was never complete on the prairie. Raiders swept through one summer, men too wild for law, hunting easy prey. Word came that they were heading toward the outlying homesteads, burning and stealing. Fear spread across the land like wildfire. The cowboy prepared the cabin, boarding windows, loading rifles. The eldest daughter begged to stand watch, her young face fierce with determination. He nodded once, handing her a rifle. "Stay close to the cabin. Aim steady. Protect your sisters." Her chest swelled with pride, her hands steady on the weapon. The night they came, the sky was black and moonless. Shouts broke the stillness, horses thundering. The cowboy fired from the shadows, his shots quick and precise. The eldest fired once, missing, but her courage did not falter. The mother stood with the middle daughter, ready with a second rifle. Flames licked the horizon, but the raiders passed on, unwilling to waste time on a cabin that fought back like a fortress. When silence returned, the girls clung to him, their mother's arms wrapped around them. He held them all close, his breath ragged, but his eyes burning with the fire of a man who would die before he let harm touch them. The eldest whispered, "We did it." And he smiled, proud beyond measure. In the aftermath, the cabin stood strong, though the land bore scars. Neighbors who had lost homes came for shelter, and she opened her door, offering bread and warmth. The cowboy worked day and night to help rebuild, teaching the girls that strength was not only in fighting but also in giving. "Pride don't come from standing taller than others," he told them. "It comes from lifting them up when they've fallen." The eldest grew into a young woman with fire in her spirit, riding the chestnut mare across the fields like she was born of the wind. The middle daughter became known for her skill with needle and rifle alike, her quiet steadiness admired by many. The youngest, though fragile in body, had laughter that healed even the hardest hearts, her spirit untamed. Through it all, the cowboy stood firm, shaping them with patience, teaching them that daughters could carry strength as proudly as any son. Their mother, once bowed and broken, now stood tall beside him, her heart no longer chained by fear. She had been beaten for birthing daughters, but under his care, those daughters grew into women who would never bow their heads in shame. The prairie still stretched endless and merciless, but within the small cabin, pride had taken root where despair once reigned. And though storms would come again, the promise held steady, the widowed cowboy had kept his word. He had raised them proud. The prairie teaches a hard And though storms would come again, the promise held steady, the widowed cowboy had kept his word. He had raised them proud. The prairie teaches a hard lesson. Nothing remains as it is forever. Seasons turn, storms break, children grow, and life pushes forward no matter how tightly we cling to it. The cabin that once stood as a fragile shelter for a broken woman and her 3 daughters became something else over the years. It became a stronghold of laughter, of struggle, of steady hands and fierce love. The widowed cowboy, who once arrived a stranger on horseback, became the spine of that home. Time reshaped them all, weaving their lives together until they could no longer imagine one without the other. The eldest daughter was the first to step fully into womanhood. She rode with confidence, her hair flying like a banner in the wind, her spirit untamed. Suitors came, young men from town, rough ranch hands, even a storekeeper's son who thought her beauty should belong to him. Each time, the cowboy's eyes studied the men with a quiet weight that tested their character without a word. The daughter, though, was not easily swayed. She had been raised on pride, not desperation. She wanted no man who saw her as less. When one bold suitor sneered and said, "A girl's place ain't on a horse," she laughed in his face and rode circles around him until he left red with shame. Her mother watched from the porch, her chest swelling with something she never believed she would feel, the joy of seeing her daughter claim her worth without fear. The middle daughter blossomed in her own quiet way. While her sister's fire burned bright, she carried a steady glow. She mended clothes, cooked with care, and shot straighter than most men when danger came near. She dreamed not of town dances or fancy dresses but of building something lasting, a life of her own on the land she had come to love. It was she who often sat by the cowboy's side in the evenings, listening as he told stories of the past, of his lost family, of the lessons the prairie had carved into him. He told her, "The strong ones ain't the loud ones. They're the ones who don't break when the storm hits." And she carried those words into her bones. The youngest, fragile at birth, grew into a girl with laughter as wild as the spring winds. Though her body was often weaker than her sister's, her spirit carried them all. She danced barefoot in the fields, sang songs she made up on the spot, and reminded them daily that joy was as much a weapon against the world as strength. She adored the cowboy, often climbing into his lap with her wooden toys, demanding stories. He gave her every tale she asked for, though his voice sometimes broke with the memory of the son he had lost. She would press her small hand against his cheek and whisper, "Don't be sad. You have us now." And in those moments, even grief felt lighter. Their mother changed too. Once, she had carried bruises and silence, her spirit beaten low. But with each passing year, she stood taller. She found her voice again, her laughter again, her pride again. The cabin she once feared would be her grave became a home she tended with love. Neighbors who once whispered pity now came to her for wisdom, for help, for strength. And at her side, the cowboy remained, a man who asked for nothing but gave everything. Their love grew not from sudden fire but from years of shared burdens, from nights when fear threatened to return, from mornings when the sun rose over a life they had built brick by brick, board by board, day by day. But life, in its cruelty and beauty, always tests. One spring, the cowboy grew ill. It began with a cough, a shadow in his lungs, a weariness that no rest could shake. He tried to hide it, pushing himself to work the fences, to ride with the eldest, to carry the youngest on his shoulders. But his strength waned, and the truth could not be denied. He was a man who had given everything, and now his body began to ask for rest. The daughters rallied to him. The eldest rode the land for medicines, her determination fierce. The middle stayed by his side, tending him with quiet care. The youngest sang to him, her small hands stroking his hair as though she could heal him with love alone. Their mother watched with tears she tried to hide, her heart breaking at the thought of losing the man who had saved them all. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the prairie in fire, he called them all to his side. His voice was weaker now, but his eyes held the same steady light they had always carried. "You've all grown stronger than I ever dreamed," he said. He looked at the eldest. "You've got fire in you. Don't let any man dim it. Ride where others say you can't, and never bow your head." He turned to the middle. "Your strength is quiet, but it's the kind that lasts. You'll hold families together, you'll build what others can't. Never think that because you're not loud, you're not powerful." Finally, his gaze fell on the youngest. "Your joy has healed me more than you'll ever know. Keep laughing. Keep singing. Remind the world that life is worth living." Then he looked at their mother. For a long moment, silence hung heavy. His hand reached for hers, trembling but sure. "You've walked through fire," he said softly. "But you rose. You gave these girls more than life, you gave them hope. And you gave me a home again. If I leave this world, I'll leave knowing I was blessed." Tears fell freely then, though he smiled through his own. The prairie wind carried their sobs, their whispers, their prayers. He lingered for weeks, fighting to stay, watching his daughters turned daughters in spirit tend to him with love. And when the end came, it was not with violence or bitterness. It was with peace. He passed beneath the open sky, their hands holding his, their hearts breaking but strong. They buried him on the hill overlooking the land, beneath the tree where he had once carved toys for the girls. The eldest stood tall at the grave, her jaw set in defiance against grief. The middle wept quietly but held her sisters close. The youngest placed one of her wooden dolls in the earth with him, whispering, "So you won't be lonely." Their mother stood last, her hand resting on the wooden cross they had built. Her heart ached with loss, but it also burned with pride. For she knew he had given her daughters something no cruelty could ever take away, the belief that they were worthy, that they were strong, that they could walk the earth with their heads high. The years that followed proved his words true. The eldest became a rider known across the prairie, breaking horses and outrunning men who once laughed at her. She married only when she found a man who saw her not as less but as equal, and together they built a ranch where daughters and sons were raised the same. The middle became the heart of the family, a woman whose quiet strength carried neighbors through hard times. She married a kind rancher, but all knew it was her hand that steadied his life, her wisdom that shaped their home. The youngest, fragile no longer, grew into a woman of song and light, her laughter carrying across the land. She never stopped reminding others of joy, even in sorrow. Their mother lived long enough to see her daughter's children play in the fields, their laughter echoing through the cabin walls. She told them stories of the cowboy, of the man who had saved them not with riches or titles but with steady hands and an unshakable heart. They grew up knowing his name, knowing his legacy, knowing that pride was their birthright. And so, though he lay in the earth, he was never gone. His love lived on in every ride, every meal shared, every song sung, every moment those girls, now women, stood tall against the world. He had kept his vow. He had raised them proud. The prairie stretched endless and unforgiving, but within that endlessness was a legacy carved deeper than stone, a family born not of blood alone, but of love, of courage, and of the unbreakable will to rise above cruelty. And in that, the widowed cowboy's story would never end.